Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Road to the White House. This week's topic is the war between policy and politics, and it should be an interesting conversation. This is part of a series that we have been engaged in for the better part of a year. This has been going on for a while, and we are now well into the home stretch. We have less than 50 days, about 7 weeks left until the election, and things are starting to heat up. So there's a lot to talk about and a lot to ruminate over. My name is Raphael Bostic. I'm a professor at the Price School, and I also am the director of the Bedrosian Center for Governance. And we are delighted to be part of this series, and we co-sponsor with the Unruh Institute of Politics in the Dornsife School and Dornsife College, and the Annenberg Center on Communication, Leadership, and Policy. It is an interdisciplinary effort, and I think that has helped to make it a richer product. Too often on campus we sit in our own fields and just talk among people who think about the narrow things that we do. This is an opportunity to broaden it out and to talk at the intersection of a lot of the issues. So we do a lot in the Price School on policy, but the politics and the communication are particularly important. We rotate the discussions, and responsibility for this week's discussion has fallen on the Bedrosian Center. And so we thought, who would be a great person to come and
but he wasn't available.
And spark a conversation. And I could think of no one better than Bebitch, Jeffe. Sherry is a delightful and pretty insightful analyst when it comes to public policy and the politics of policy. And there's very much that I'm looking forward to having a conversation with her about. If you get up early in the morning, you might actually see her on TV. She's on basically these days every day. She's an analyst for NBC, and she's on the morning show there. I guess it's KNBC is the station name, but the local NBC affiliate, and she definitely will wake you up in the morning with what she has to say. As with all of these events, we don't want this to just be a couple of talking heads who are talking and you listen and don't engage. So we want to make sure that there's plenty of time for questions and a little back and forth between Sherry, myself, and you in the audience. And so, so we're looking forward to that as well. I did want to just say that when we get to the question and answer session, a question and response, I guess, is a little better. We would ask two things. First, that you give us your name and your affiliation so we know where you're coming from and who you are. And then the second is to please try to ask your question and treat Sherry with the respect that you would like to have if you were on the receiving end of a question.
As good as I can get.
Yes. We are on camera, however, and we don't want anything to be in there for posterity's sake. So, so with that, Sherry, so I wanted to start this by asking Sherry to respond to something we talked about a little earlier. So we called this session the war between politics and policy. And did we mess up?
Yeah, you did, because, and this is one thing that I've been trying to inculcate in my students for a very long time. What do you want me to do? Oh, okay. This is for the room. You cannot have policy without politics. Politics in the best sense of the concept. Politics is what you have to do in a democracy to get policy. You've got to compromise. You've got to log roll, if you will. You know, I'll give you this if you give me that. The war between politics and policy has never been so bright as it is now. And I think that's part of the reason we see so much polarization, so much antagonism in politics today. We can't move policy because we will not engage, those who make policy, will not engage in politics in the best sense of the term.
So let's take that to the campaign.
Okay. Speaking of no policy, yeah.
And this road to the White House. Well, I actually wanted to give you. You don't know I'm going to do this, but
oh boy,
we did a little research.
Uh-oh.
And we found something that Sherry and her
my
husband wrote about 3 weeks ago, before the conventions, and it was 10 defining moments that will shape the election outcome. Number 10 was Chris Christie's speech at the Republican convention,
which was a dud. Now this was before the conventions, mind you.
No, she didn't say that. The second is Governor Romney's acceptance speech,
which was okay, but he didn't bat it out of the ballpark.
The number 8 was Bill Clinton's address to the Democratic National Convention,
which probably was the most important moment of both conventions. If you look at the polls, the post-convention polls, for the first time in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, President Obama is in a dead heat with Romney, Governor Romney, on who will do the best job on the economy, and I am convinced that's the Clinton bounce from the convention. Clinton explained the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago, in a way that nobody on the Democratic side had done up to that point.
So that one you would say has risen to its.
That was an important.
A defining moment.
When I said defining moment, I didn't mean all good.
Oh, we're getting there, I think.
We are.
We're going to get there. So number 6 was President Obama's acceptance speech,
which I don't think lived up to his 2004 speech, which was breathtaking, and even his 2008 acceptance speech, but it was good enough.
So that's 4 of the top 10 defining moments. The next 5 are to come. So there we have 4 debates that are coming up, 3 presidential debates, 1 vice presidential debate. The other defining moment that you say we should look out for is the October jobs report.
Oh, yes.
And how economic performance is
Actually, there are 2. The September jobs report, which is coming very fast, and the October jobs report comes, I think,
the Friday
before the election. Now, I want a caveat there, Raphael, and it is this. We are seeing a significant bump in early voting. People have already begun to vote in some states, most particularly North Carolina. So that October report could turn out to be not so powerful as it might have been had we not have this large percentage of people already having voted. And that's also true about the debates. For Mitt Romney, the next, probably the last best chance he has to turn the narrative around is the October 3rd debate in Denver on domestic issues. It's the first presidential debate. But after that, we're going to see the impact of early voting again. And I think we'll also see a lot of voters turning off the rest of the debate if they don't feel that they've been engaged by the debates.
So we've gone through 9 of the 10 items. The 10th item, which you have as number 1, I'm not sure if it was number 1 because you thought it was most important or least important, but I'm just going to read it.
And then tell me what you think.
Inevitably, something no one can anticipate will cast its shadow on the election. It might be a natural disaster, an international crisis, or a blunder caught on tape.
There you go. Thank you.
So this is August 27th. So we get.
Actually, that was my husband's. I can't take credit for it.
So we have seen 2 of those 3 in the last week and a half.
Yeah.
Right. How is that playing out in terms of the course of this election?
A good question. The blunder on tape is playing out negatively for Mitt Romney, I think significantly, well, for 2 major reasons. One, every day that Mitt Romney cannot talk about the economy and focus the debate on the poor economy and the poor job that President Obama has done turning the economy around is a bad day for Mitt Romney. His strategy was to focus like a laser on jobs and the economy, and he really hasn't been able to do that. And the one time he could get the debate back to the issue of taxation, he did it with his 47% quote, and that was a negative for him. So I think that was a very important thing. The other important thing to come out of those tapes was a reinforcement of an already almost ingrained perception of Mitt Romney as this elite, crass plutocrat who doesn't have the concern for our issues, for the issues of the middle class. And the way he appears to be just simply dismissing some 47% of the electorate. And the electorate, that part of the electorate which doesn't have a yacht or 2 houses or a car elevator or is the CEO of a major corporation or is a million to billionaire. That is very dangerous, true or not, for Mitt Romney. Now, I happen to think, well, first of all, what part of iPhone didn't this guy understand? No candidate can ever be unguarded, ever again. The macaca moment when George Allen, the senator from Virginia, pointed at a young man who was taping a rally and who happened to be a dark-skinned Indian American, and Allen called him a macaca, which happens to be slang for a small black monkey. And quite rightly, that went viral in the infancy of the internet and probably cost him the election. President Obama's ill-thought-out remark in San Francisco during the 2008 campaign, when he talked about voters in Pennsylvania being bitter and clinging to their guns and religion, just before a hard-fought Pennsylvania primary in which Hillary Clinton beat the bejesus out of him. And a lot of that had to do with that ill-timed remark. I don't understand why or how Mitt Romney allowed all of that information out. Yeah, they paid $50,000 a ticket to get in. Yeah, there was no press there. Yeah, he thought he was among friends. But in politics, you learn very quickly. There are no friends. There are no enemies. There are only mutual interests. And at that event, somebody who didn't have a mutual interest placed a camera on a piece of furniture and let it go.
So there's a lot that you had in there, and I wanted to focus on.
I usually do too much.
On 2 aspects. You can't do too much when you have an hour. I know when you're on news, you might have, you got those small snippets.
8 seconds.
But the first question that I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on is really around how do people make decisions, right? And is there something to something that I call the beer standard? People look at the candidates and say, who would I rather have a beer with? Who can I talk to?
But you can't have a beer with Mitt Romney.
So
he does drink Diet Coke.
So
who would you rather have a Diet Coke with?
Change this to the soda slash beer standard. So is there something to that, and how is that cultivated? What kind of imagery or communication can you use to strengthen that perspective?
There's an old saying that sincerity is the most important thing in politics. If you can fake that, you can fake anything. But that's not exactly true. You do have to resonate. Your connection with the voter has to be credible. If you watched Mitt Romney during his press conference after the tapes were released, you could tell from his body language and you can tell through his facial expressions how much he didn't want to be there and how much he really didn't believe his own explanation. I do think Mitt Romney's a decent guy, and I do think at the particular event we were talking about, he gave red meat to the base. even though he may not believe it totally. But it tells, particularly when he then gets in front of a microphone, in front of his press corps, and said, I wasn't doing it quite as elegantly as I should have. He has changed his stance, as has the president, often enough that people are skeptical of it. And one of the things the Obama campaign did was to create Romney's image, create his personality very early in the campaign. They were out there in early summer creating this image of Mitt Romney as this hard, harsh executive, this rich guy who was totally out of touch with the American people, whether or not it was true. So it's not only your own personality that's important, it's how your opponent portrays you.
Or whether you're effective in portraying
your
yourself
own,
first.
exactly,
Right?
exactly. You got to get out there, and for some reason, the Romney campaign thought that nobody was paying attention in the summer, and they didn't have to worry about creating an image until people began to focus on the election, and that allowed the Obama campaign to be out there all by themselves, painting this very ugly picture of Mitt Romney with very little response from the Romney campaign.
So you might almost see this as a reverse swift voting in the sense of trying to establish
Excuse me. Except that this was well before swift voting. Swift voting was done, and you know what swift voting is? You know what happened in 2004 when a group of conservative Vietnam veterans managed to take John Kerry, the Democratic nominee's service in the Vietnam War. He later became an opponent of the Vietnam War, and turn it against him. Among other things, there were ads showing him listening intently to Jane Fonda. He did go before Congress and throw his medals on the steps of the Capitol to protest where the Vietnam War was going. And former Vietnam soldiers were interviewed and ads were cut, which basically destroyed John Kerry's selling point, that he was a leader and a veteran. And that's something of what, I think it's a very good observation, Raphael, that's something of what happened. That was something of the strategy that the Obama campaign had early on. Romney was going to run on his credentials as a business executive, his ability to turn companies, economies around, and the Obama campaign made it very difficult by getting there first.
And I would just note that Stephanie Cutter, who runs a lot of the strategy for the Obama campaign, was a Kerry communications person.
That's right.
And
she also worked for Ted Kennedy.
So she has been shaped by this in a pretty significant way. Second thing I wanted to get to on your remarks on the tape is the policy aspect of this. Right. So underlying some of the conversation that Governor Romney said was a statement about level of taxation,
yes,
about personal responsibility, and about entitlements. Right. There is a debate that goes on about entitlements. There is a debate that goes on about taxation. Is there a way to sort of revive those in a less inflammatory way that can get before the American people?
Not now. Not now, not during this campaign, because this is one case in which the politics have overtaken the policy. The debate is ongoing, but now I think voters are skeptical of either side because the views are so polarized and the ideologies are so apart from one another. Somebody will get up on MSNBC and talk about how wrong the statistics are, and you know it's on MSNBC. So if you're favorable toward MSNBC, you'll go, yeah, man, it's all wrong. If you're a Fox viewer, you'll turn the channel. Somebody will get up on Fox and probably use the statistics in a very different way to come to a very different conclusion. And if you're an MSNBC type, you'll, no. People, let me put it this way. On every single thing that has come up in this campaign, I have never seen the level of lack of trust, of cynicism, and not only among and between politicians, but among and between voters, and certainly in the media. And I don't see we're going to get anything discussed in any meaningful way, and it may not even happen after the election. If there's a split government, again, it's going to be very difficult to move policy. If the Tea Party proves to Republicans that they'd better toe the line on taxes, they'd better toe the line on social issues, and only then can they win, Republicans in Congress, and Mitt Romney, if he is the president, are not going to move very far away from there, and that's not going to get them very many Democratic votes.
So you talked about polarization.
And vice versa.
Do you think that it's intractable? Do you think people are where they are and that there aren't very many people left to convince? I mean, are we locked in? Has the cement dried? Is the bread baked?
I don't know. I mean, I never thought it before, but, you know, because everything is cyclical. We may be totally frozen in cement right now in our views, and at some point that may change. I mean, we really are only over, what, 200-something years old. At this point in time, it appears to be a long time before the kind of compromise and cooperation one saw, for example, in the 60s, is once again a part of the dialogue. But who knows? Who knows? I mean, this is America. What do we know?
Well, I will note that America has been known to do dramatic and bold things in the past. Going from George W. Bush to Barack Obama is a pretty radical shift. So there's an opportunity for us to, I don't think you would disagree with me, that we could surprise ourselves and come up with some real interesting solutions.
I wish I could agree with you, and I really should, and I should be a Pollyanna, and I should be an optimist, but I get the sense, and maybe you guys want to comment on this, that we're so tired, and we are so beaten about by the screaming and the yelling that goes on within the political arena, within the media, all over this country, and we are also nervous about where we are going to go with our own futures, that we have sort of turned away from the big picture and are very much engaged in our own lives, in our own future, in making our one little family unit, friend unit, whatever unit, able to survive in the environment that we now find ourselves in, both the economic environment and the political environment.
So I would take a slightly different take on that, which is,
see, he's policy, I'm politics.
I'm optimistic. Pollyanna.
He's theory.
I actually think that we'll talk about that a little bit.
Again?
And this will be, yeah, exactly. This will be the last question, then we'll open it up. I do think that when people are faced with crisis, they're willing to go outside of their comfort zone. And on very many fronts, we are approaching crisis fiscally.
Oh, we're not approaching it. We're in it.
Well, as we've seen, so being in Washington the last 3 years, the sense of when the crisis is really real is much later than where most people in the rest of the world seem to see it. And there may be...
Or maybe it's the opposite, and that's the problem.
Maybe. So it's interesting. So when 4 years ago, when Hank Paulson wrote his one-page thing, give me what, $500 billion.
Right.
When Wall Street was collapsing, the Congress didn't initially approve that.
Correct.
Right? They said no. We're going to wait. We're going to talk, and we're going to review. And I was sitting in my office in Lewis Hall saying, we have gone over the edge, and this is the end. And it turned out it wasn't the end. And so it is very interesting. There is a modulation that takes place. And we'll see. So the sequester that is coming, or the potential sequester, if there's not a solution to the budget, there are real issues about do you need to decide it on December 25th? Can you wait till January 18th, January 21st, or even March? And there is a diversity of opinions on that.
But there is a common agreement that something will be done after the election, whatever that
so
means.
After could be
it could
2015,
be,
right? So
whenever, yeah, it could be the lame duck Congress or the new Congress. My guess is they're going to vote for to let the lame ducks do it and get it over with, but we'll see. It makes, I think, more sense. Those who are retiring, those who were defeated, maybe they'll say, I've got to take one for the good of the country because it doesn't matter anymore. And we might see something happen.
that would surprise me. But anyway, let's open it up. Are there questions that people have? Yes.
My name is Steven, and I'm a freshman here in political science. And it seems like the media focuses a lot on like horse race mentality and the politics itself, rather than on juxtaposing the different candidates' policy decisions or policy plans. Do you see a time when it might get back where we might see a larger focus on policy itself rather than politics in the future? Like, do you think that is even realistic for the focus of the media to change?
I don't see it happening. Maybe Gary has. There's my editor from the LA Times, and he may have a different opinion on this. And the reason I don't see it happening, and certainly not in the immediate or even midterm future, is it's very difficult to explain policy. It's not good television. I mean, Gary could do it when he was at the opinion section of the Times because, you know, we could take our time and pontificate. And it was a long article in the paper, which maybe a couple people read. But TV is into ratings. TV is into eyeballs. TV is into keeping you interested. The horse race has drama, and the horse race is easy to cover. And it's easy for a reporter, a television reporter, to explain. You don't have to know much, if anything, about the complicated policies that we've been discussing up here. So I just, quite frankly, don't see it. Now, the next step, of course, is the internet and the blogs and even the newspapers who are on the internet. There will be some mainstream media on the internet that will still do real reporting. But what really concerns me is people will get more information that is less accurate than they might even from television by simply reading the blogs that they care about and going on the internet. If anything, you're going to see less of real policy analysis, if that could ever happen. But I do think that I don't see it turning back to the way, I'm not even sure it used to be that way, quite frankly, when you look at it, because the first newscasts on television were a half an hour, which is 22 minutes of news, and they didn't have a lot of time for policy either. It's a long answer, and it's a cynical one, but I just don't see the motivation for it, either from viewers or from the media, and among media, I include the business end of it.
So you don't think the debates have an opportunity to help raise some policy issues?
Well, it depends on the media, quite frankly. I mean, if they're going to ask questions like, what was it, Baby Boo Boo or Sookie, which one? No, and let me put it this way. Any candidate worth his or her salt will know that you don't have to answer the questions that's asked. You just say what you want to have heard. And it's not a real debate anyway when you've got moderators and reporters who spend weeks trying to find the gotcha question. I mean, and nobody's going to stand still for a Lincoln Douglas debate. Not in this country, not in this environment. You know, we're all ADD.
All right, yes.
My name is Nathaniel Haas. I'm a freshman studying political science. You talked about the early voting briefly, and so my question then is, who are both campaigns trying to convince as the campaign gets towards the election, and what should their strategies be to convince the people that are obviously going to swing the election, which is the other side?
Good question.
So did everyone hear the question? No.
Yeah.
So the question was, there's been a lot of talk about the communication. Who are the candidates trying to convince in the next 7 weeks, and what are the strategies that they should be using or might use to convince them?
Here's what I think has happened. Right now, there is a smaller percentage of undecideds than almost at any other time in any other election. They're now debating as to whether or not, it's somewhere around 5, 6, maybe 7% still undecided. And a lot of that undecided that are being targeted are in these 5 to 12 battleground states. But what I believe, so you're going to see that, we're not going to see any ads, we're not going to see any candidates except when they need money and they come and use California as an ATM, which they have done for many, many years. Nothing new on that. But you'll see what they're targeting now are those voters in the battleground states which they think can move. But even more importantly, and I say this having watched what President Obama is doing and where he is going, and Mitt Romney's visits to Latino voters and his focus on women, I think particularly the Republicans have decided to use the 2004 campaign as their model. And that was predicated on simply getting out their vote. When Mitt Romney spoke to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, he did very little, quite frankly, to sell his own policies with regard to Latinos. Because if he did, he'd lose the base. But what he did was attack President Obama for disappointing Latinos. Why? Maybe Latinos will stay home. He was moving to depress his opponent's vote. So I think more than anything else, in these last weeks of the election, everything has been pinned on turnout. And surprise, every election always comes down to turnout. So they're moving to mobilize their base, and they're moving to gain some motion in battleground states, one way or another, mostly to energize their base. The independent swing voters are out there in such small numbers, relatively, that they're becoming the second-tier focus.
Question in the back.
Hi, my name is Richard Flegel. I work for Dornside. You know, you've been focusing on perception and the desire to shape perception, quite understandably. But beneath that, there's a reality. And every once in a while, it looks like we're actually seeing the person. So when Mitt Romney responds to the 47% video, and he's standing up there squirming, looking for something to say, it looks like we're actually seeing the man there. Now, aren't those moments also telling in terms of the way people respond to the candidates, those kind of unexpected moments in which you glimpse the real person back there?
Well, that's I mean, you've decided that's the real person. This is a Rorschach test, actually, that, you know, if you're a Romney supporter, you're going to view that tape one way. If you're not, you're going to view it another way.
But I think he's talking about the press
Oh, you mean the press conference?
Yes, when he reacts to the moment, when he's in a tough spot and has to respond. Isn't that the moment when we see the real guy?
If you're watching, I think quite possibly, yeah. But again, who is watching, how many people are watching, and where do those who are watching it stand? You know, where you stand depends on where you sit.
Other questions? Yes.
So you said that,
name?
Oh, David Gasser.
Don't let him ask a question.
This question was planted.
I know. I'm sure.
So you said that one of the reasons policy is not really discussed is because it's complicated and people don't really want to engage with it or can't really understand all the details. But one area
I didn't say that, David. There you go again.
Well,
She's a master.
Oh, we've been together for too long.
I'm actually going to start watching ABC now.
Thank you. Thank you. My point exactly.
One policy area that is particularly relevant to most people, there's been intense interest because of protests and recent movies, but has seen little to no attention in the campaign, is education policy. And there have been periods where the federal government has made this a big issue and it's become a very political issue, but right now it's almost a non-issue. Do you think there's any possibility for either side to jump on the education policy issue, or are the two candidates too close together in terms of their views that there's nowhere to win any points?
The reality of it is, education is way down on the list of concerns of ordinary voters. If you look at the polls, the first three major issues are jobs in the economy, jobs in the economy, and jobs in the economy. And that is where certainly Mitt Romney is going to focus his energies. And now the Democrats, I think, emboldened by Clinton's speech and his explanation of what it means, will also focus more than they might have on jobs in the economy. Now, I mean, you were there. Maybe you have a better perspective on this than I do. But education is one of those issues that have become locally focused. And there is no answer on the federal level. There's no one size fits all. That's the debate that's going on now about standardized testing. So why bother to even focus on it, because it is so complicated, and because voters do not seem to be focused on that issue as a critical issue in their voter choice.
So are there any policy issues?
Economy and jobs.
And so let's...
For Latinos, number 2 is immigration. Overall, health care. Some small groups care most about social issues. The debate over abortion rights.
Now, you haven't talked about the budget deficit or debt.
Oh, we have a deficit. Really?
I think we do. Yeah.
Okay. I believe you. Go ahead.
I mean, the reason I'm hesitating is that economy and jobs is extremely broad, and
of course,
it's extremely vague.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do you talk? So what policies will grab someone to say you are addressing the economy and jobs?
Well, candidate A is pledging to build 12 million new jobs if he is elected, but we never hear from either candidate how. We're not going to. Are you asking me if we're going to have anything more than 5-point plans before the election? I mean, you can. Every re-election election is a referendum on the incumbent. So if you want to know how Barack Obama is handling the situation, there's a record there. And that's why it's so dicey for an unpopular incumbent or an incumbent that is presiding over a nasty economy. But you are not going to find an opponent, any opponent, not only Mitt Romney, who is going to get into the dirty details. There will be slogans, there will be broad indications, and that will be that.
So are you surprised that, I mean, given what you just said about incumbents overseeing dicey economies, how surprised should we be that the president is anywhere close to leading this?
I'm gabsmacked. I mean, really, he ought to be by rights at least behind. But what you're seeing here is, and this goes back, and we haven't discussed it in enough depth yet, it goes back to the role of personality in politics and your soda/beer theory. Up until the last Wall Street Journal NBC poll, which has Barack Obama and Mitt Romney in a dead heat on handling the economy for the first time in this election cycle in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, Romney's strong point has been the fact that he has been perceived as the one who would do better in turning the economy around. What Barack Obama has had going for him is people like him so much more. They trust him so much more. They feel far more comfortable around him. And I'm talking the general electorate here, not specific voter groups. That, for a long time, has buoyed the president up to near parity or more than parity now with Mitt Romney. It's kind of interesting if you think, well, you probably weren't even born, but when former California Governor Ronald Reagan ran against the incumbent Democratic President Jimmy Carter in 1980, and this is, one of the Romney strategies is to paint Barack Obama as the new Jimmy Carter. People liked Reagan a lot more than they liked Carter, but they were very nervous about him as commander-in-chief, as being able to handle the job of president. They didn't know whether or not he was a wacko, quite frankly. I mean, they thought, oh my God, he's going to come and start shooting for foreign policy. There was one debate, 1 week before the election, in which Ronald Reagan just cast aside all of those doubts and leveled the playing field, if you will. They liked him before, and now they felt comfortable with him as commander-in-chief. And in that last week, he moved out and never looked back. He won the election. Carter had the incumbency and its pluses and minuses. Carter had the experience, but nobody liked him. Once Reagan got over that experience hoop, once he passed that commander-in-chief test, he won. And if you think about it, Romney's the mirror image of that. I mean, they don't like him. They think he's capable, but they don't like him in the way they like Barack Obama. And I think it's going to be harder for Romney to close that gap than it was for Reagan to close the gap the other way. I mean, who you are is that important in a race like this, and a race that is so close. And also, I have to say, I think Romney may have failed the commander-in-chief test by his premature statement criticizing the president's actions on the Libya attack when the attack hadn't even occurred.
Other questions?
Oh, don't let him either. Over there.
I'll follow the prerogative of my guest.
No, you can.
I'll get to him.
Yeah, you'll get to him.
Okay, I'm Alexis. I'm studying cinematic arts. And so, going back to the debt ceiling issue in Congress and not being productive, I know a lot of people have been talking about how to change Congress to get them to be more productive, about things going faster, but I know the fundamental role of Congress isn't to be fast, isn't to be fast decision makers, it's to be deliberate, to talk about it.
That's more the Senate than the House.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is, do you think there's a way to change Congress so that it is getting more things done when there's so many polarizing issues in Congress?
What's missing from Congress, I think, well, first of all, Jess Unruh used to have an incredible saying, which was, I always sell 125% of myself. That way, nobody owns me. And I used to always point out that if you sell 125% of yourself, then everybody owns you, and you are stuck Because if you give something to this guy over here who contributes to campaign, you alienate another contributor. And I don't know how you stop that. I am not a believer in public funding of campaigns because I have not seen a campaign financing reform that moved us closer to public funding that hasn't exacerbated the problem and hasn't moved the money farther down out of sight. So until you figure that one out, I don't know what you can do. I'm going to be interested to see what our new redistricting, California's new redistricting system does. We have taken redistricting out of the hands of incumbent state legislators who, surprise, surprise, always manage to create safe districts for themselves to remain incumbents, at least until they're termed out. We have the new top 2 primary, which says in closed primaries, what you have had is in a Democratic primary, it's the activists who turn out, and they're to the left of the general electorate. In the Republican primary, it's the activists who turn out, and they're to the right of the general election. And they move into state seats, so they only worry about attacks from farther right and farther left. And that increases polarization once they're in office. But that's a state issue. And I don't know whether or not it's going to work here or not, but I am certainly convinced that closed primaries are a part of the problem when they're combined with districts that are drawn to protect incumbents. It just enhances the rigidity of both major parties. Okay, Gary.
I just wanted to go back.
Who are you?
That's Gary, speaker.
Yeah, I'm a staff.
He's director of faculty op-ed.
So,
something like that.
Right.
That's why
I want to go back to the point you made about this election has become a recap of 2004, which was get out the base. And demographically speaking, that means, and I think Ronald Bronstein has written this, and others have followed, that the Republicans need 61% of the white vote.
That's right.
And that was the level last achieved in '88, I think, with Bush won. But I may be wrong. If that indeed is what this election is about, I mean, do you believe this is going to be much more, as the election proceeds, the campaign proceeds, this is going to become much more racialized? I mean, you could argue that Romney's comments does play to a white voter and his prejudices. So, and of course the famous welfare ad, which has been running forever, despite its
the fact that it's not true.
not true. So, I mean, you see this campaign becoming more racialized, certainly the advertising as we proceed to election. And what are the
I think it has become more racialized. It is racialized, but we just don't talk about it. And there are, in some respects, code words being used. You know, nobody's calling anybody a racist very loudly, if you will. But yeah, it has to come. It has to be to that extent. Romney also, it said, needs 38% of the Latino vote. Or he has to prevent Barack Obama from getting, I think he's like 68%. He's 40 points ahead. And Romney's in the mid-20s in the Hispanic vote. How do you do that? You want to damp down the Hispanic vote. The African-American vote, clearly, when it's 94-0, you forget about that. But you got to get those whites out. They did it in 2004. Karl Rove had a brilliant strategy. In 11 states, the Republicans had placed on the ballot Defense of Marriage Acts, brought out the Tea Partiers, brought out the conservatives. Bush won 9 of those states, those 11 states, including Ohio. And that's how narrow his election victory was. They're going to have to do that. But they're never going to say, Gary, you know, we're doing this because we know we're not going to get the minority vote. We're going to eke what we can out of the women's vote, and we know we need this 61% of the white vote. But what they're forgetting is that white Democrats are very strongly for Obama, and right now, you know, independents aren't that much of the electorate.
Other questions? So yes.
Yes, my name is Matt Young. I study policy at the Price School. I noticed you keep mentioning right and left, but is it really, in terms of the politics, is it an equal distribution on the different sides?
What do you mean by equal distribution, Matt?
At Obamacare really being more of a Republican-style healthcare reform that was first put forward by Romney, and now the Democrat cap-and-trade system, which 12 years
Closely
ago
Republican.
was primarily a Republican issue. It seems like what's being attributed as the left side of the intensity of the ideology in the political spectrum is really shifting more to the right.
So did everyone hear that question?
What you're seeing is a conscious decision by each party to support or to deny a policy on political bases. I mean, you see Mitt Romney running against his own health care plan because his own party won't have it. Again, it's playing to the base. It's trying to be accepted by the base. And cap and trade, I expect, I'm not as clear on that, quite frankly, excuse me, as I am on the other. Let me think about it. In some respects, it's not an alien position for Democrats who talk about the environment and who want to relate to their environmental base. But each party does decide. Here's today, each party does decide almost first and foremost, what does it mean politically? There used to be something called the common good. There used to be something called the public good. And every once in a while, politicians would look at an issue and decide, we've got to do this one for the country, or for the state, or for the city. That doesn't happen much anymore.
It sounds like a little bit of war between policy and politics. It's going to get back to that.
Oh, you're so
Next
nasty. You really are nasty. You know that, don't you? Yeah, except that, and I will continue to make this point. It's politics in the negative sense that is at war with policy. But you are not going to get policy unless you understand the positive axis and the necessity of engaging in the positive aspects of politics. Ha!
Lisa Schweitzer, I'm with the Price School. Sherry, we talked about two of the possible big ticket events, uncertain events that were likely to happen before the election, and we've talked a lot about the disaster of the uncensored, I don't know, Mitt Gone Wild version of video, which I actually think is probably going to hurt him with some aspects of the GOP as well. Simply because of the way that, he was talking about not caring about the 47% instead of talking about the virtues of hard work. Those are very different messages, and that's how I think Reagan was really much more capable of talking and questioning entitlements. And is casting it as a question of virtue versus, you know, those people, we just write them off and we try to win by virtue of numbers and power, right? Which is that second thing. But instead of sort of just blithering on, I wanted to ask you about the second major sort of unforeseen event, which, how unforeseen can it really be since we've had some sort of, you know, version of foreign policy violence in every election, you know, for the past, what, 15 years, or 15.
More than that.
It's jobs in the economy. Is that really going to turn into something that Romney hopes that it will turn into?
He has a problem with that, Lisa, because neither he nor Paul Ryan have had any foreign policy. experience. This is the least schooled in foreign policy ticket we've had, and particularly on the Republican side, in a very long time. And there still is, to some extent, I mean, until we get tired of it, this dynamic that we tend to rally around the flag, rally around the commander-in-chief in times of crisis. Remember the old saying, politics ends at the water's edge. Doesn't so much anymore, but among voters there still is this rally round the flag dynamic that comes into effect. But I will tell you, the Obama White House is sweating bullets right now. If this continues, if the deaths continue, if every night when we turn on the news we see these horrible photos, it is not good for Barack Obama. In fact, in the latest NBC Wall Street Journal poll, he has dipped below 50% in his handling of foreign affairs. It's down, I think, 4%. So, and this was taken right around the time when the Libya problem really exploded. So he has to worry about that too. It would be interesting to see if it were the John McCain of the year 2000 versus Barack Obama in this foreign policy environment, how the campaign would turn.
I think we have time for one more question, if there are any out there. Yes.
My name is Ed Boyle. I'm a graduate student at the Edinburgh School. So I wanted to actually go back quickly to the debate you guys were having as to whether there's any potential for movement here or for something better to arise. And you were saying you don't think so in the short term because people are fed up with the process and they're also tired. So with that in mind, I want to talk about young people for a second because so many of us in here are young. And I think among that group at least, people are certainly fed up. I don't think they're tired. I think it's more they're sort of sick of the traditional political process and sort of partisanship, so Republicans versus Democrats. And if you look at rates of independence among young people and also the Occupy movement, even the Tea Party movement in the beginning, which was really driven by young people to a large extent, and sort of that look opposed with what you see on TV, which is this endless stream of Republican and Democratic consultants sort of just fighting back and forth. So given that these parties have, you know, the scope of these problems is so large, whether it's money in politics, whether it's the Electoral College, which basically means that your vote in California doesn't count, right? Like, you might as well not vote. This is going to be a state for Obama. So, like, these are big entrenched
But if
problems.
enough people decide that, it might not be a state
right,
for
if
Obama.
everyone decided that and no one voted, but realistically, everyone in this room, it just doesn't matter. Your vote is much more meaningful in Florida. So that's a problem with the system that the parties seem to have not been able to address, you know, with money in politics. So you're also saying you think we need more politics, which I agree with to an extent, in the good sense. Of
Let's
people.
shorten this up with your question.
Sorry. So my question is,
You're good.
these debates and having people talk to each other, do you think that the two parties are capable of that? Do you really think that...
Of what, exactly?
Of talking to each other and solving these big problems, or do you think we need less partisanship and more sort of problem solver?
How do you get that?
I don't know. I
don't either. I mean, that's what we've been talking about for an hour. I mean, I don't think there's an easy answer to any of it. You know, my spiel has always been part of this problem is the fault of educators like myself and others. You know, it's not only that you don't have civics taught anymore, it's that when it's taught, the teacher stands up before you and says, make a difference, vote. You vote, you walk away, you make no difference at all. And in California, it's not all about voting. It's about keeping an eye on what they do after you send them to Congress, after you send them to the White House. And that takes energy, and that takes education, and that takes knowledge and commitment. And until that happens, I despair. And I don't see it happening yet.
So I think
on that happy note.
so I'm not going to let it end on that note. So I actually think Sherry is exactly right, that part of what we are facing here is a question of citizenship and our commitment to making the difference and ensuring that when folks go to do a job, they do the job. And the job is not to yell at someone else. The job is actually to make decisions and solve problems. And the more people that say that, the more shot we have that it will actually happen. When you're on the Hill, you go talk to people on the Hill, the difference between staffers and members, the staffers that work for Congress people and the members is sometimes quite striking. The staffers work on the problems every day. They're trying to figure out what a meaningful solution is. And the members are out in front of people all day. They're actually different jobs, and finding ways to tie them and force them to be closer together is a challenge that we all face in trying to reshape how decisions get made. It's not going to be easy, right? So we shouldn't think that this is going to be an easy transformation, but I also don't think it's impossible. And it'll be up to all of us to try to figure a way to find that solution and make people act more rational, more sane, and more accommodating to the fact that we have diversity, and that diversity means that none of us can be fully satisfied. That's my
And
response.
accommodation is key. You're absolutely right.
So anyway, hopefully we're ending on a happier note there. But I did want to thank you, Sherry, for
My pleasure. Thank you, guys. It was fun. Thank you.